Hey, how's it going? This is the first Phaser Space um, sort of musical sketch session here. I'll be building um, little tracks basically in different environments. Today I'm going to be just making a sort of some ambient arpeggiated um, sort of chill sounds in VCV Rack. And yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. I'll try to explain what I'm doing as I'm going along. So first thing I'm going to do is add an audio module, which is going to allow me to output um, any sound that I generate in here. So I can right click and then type in audio, and it's important to pick the sound source that you'll be using and then turn the volume down to start. We'll start with a actually let's start with an oscillator. So what we'll do is just make sort of a droning tone. So we can place down, oh, yeah, VCO. And then we hear a tone coming out of here. So what we can do to make this a little bit more interesting now is to do some sequencing with it. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to be using a module called permutation. And what it does is stores slots of up to 16 values and then loops through them, and then outputs each step of the way the current value, but it also allows you to write new steps. So to show what that looks like, we'll just drop in an LFO. We don't need a specific tempo to start. We put a square wave into the clock input, and then it's writing values here, and the values, if they're over I believe 5 volts. So I think by default it goes from 1 to 10 volts. If it's above 5 volts, it will show up as a white light on the LED. Otherwise, it'll show up as like a dimmed light. And so what's happening here is it's outputting stuff out of the control output. So I'll show you what that looks like. So every time a pulse comes out of the LFO, it's sending the permutation is sending a random output into the scope. Additionally, it also outputs a gate. So whether the gate is on and off is also determined by the same value. I believe it's whether it's over 5 volts or not, but I'm not sure. Anyway, what I like to do is lower the number of bits, or basically slots, that it's storing. So right now it's storing 8, and then if I bring this over to the left, it's going to change less frequently. So right now it'll change a value 10% of the time. So what this means is I get a looping melody, but it doesn't fully loop the same way every time. It occasionally will evolve. So now I can take the input here, put it into the VCO, and then out the output. And it's not going to sound good right now, but you can hear the different tones coming out. So a couple things need to happen to make this sound better. The first is that right now we're getting the full 0 to I'm not exactly 100% sure what the maybe it's 5 volts. In any case, we need to scale it down. So for melodies, a rule of thumb that I like to use is scale down the full spectrum of values down to about 20%. So the rescale starts at a gain of 0%, so we want it to be at 20. Now, to compare the two, the blue one is much, much smaller in the range of values. Oops. And right now it's very atonal. It's not playing any specific pitches. It's playing any tone in between. So we can constrain that using what's called a quantizer. So now we have the beginning of a voice, basically, a single voice that we can use. We can slightly change the timbre of the sound a little bit, so that'll allow us to highlight certain voices as we start layering them. Is sort of what my thought process is there. So to make this a little bit more interesting, what we can do is use what's called an analog shift register, but basically the idea is it stores values in kind of a cascading manner so that there's a certain number of basically buckets, and you can tap whichever bucket you want, but essentially after one bucket receives a value, it sends its old value down to the next bucket down the line, and so on. And so this can make for some very interesting sort of spiraling melodies, I guess is a good way to put it. So we can trigger the shift register with the LFO, just like we're triggering the permutation. We can put the input of the permutation in here and then send it out here, and this will be the same thing that we had before. But now what the cool thing is now each of these outputs are also sending stuff out. So we can get this output, and then we can get this output, and then we can see that the green output is lagged behind the yellow output. And it goes all the way down the line as far as we want. So now where this starts getting interesting is we can duplicate this a couple times. And connect them in different places. And in fact, we may not even connect them sequentially like we're doing here, but just to start off with, to hear what sort of result we get. And there's sort of an interesting audio illusion that happens here because the notes don't have a distinct start and end, and because they all trigger at the same time. There's not a clear delineation between what note is playing and whether it's the first voice, the second voice, or the third voice that plays it. What that means is that you end up with these sort of, they're beautiful melodies, but at some level they're more abstract. They're playing, there's no high, middle, or low. They're changing positions constantly, basically. So there are more structured ways, I guess, of creating kind of chorale-esque harmonies. But this is one fun way to do it. So there's a few things that we can do to make this even more interesting here, is to change them at different rates, and this will provide a little bit of rhythm of some sort. So a quick and easy one to try is the topograph. And this is a really interesting one. It's sort of like a rhythm generator, but it works a little bit like an Etch-a-Sketch. So essentially you have an X and a Y that you can scroll between the values to pick a point on a two-dimensional plane, essentially. And what point that is corresponds to some sort of mapping of three rhythmic outputs. So if I put a clock in here, these will output at different rates. If I can get this to properly start. Here we go. So we will start seeing some... There we go. So we'll start seeing some outputs coming out of here. Now we can take... there's independent trigger inputs here. By default, any trigger that happens above a non-mapped trigger will just be normaled to the one above it. That means that it'll just receive the trigger from the one above it. But instead what we can do is... let's see. Am I doing this right? So now we're already getting a little bit more of a semblance of a melody going on, just because each of these voices are now changing at a different rate. One thing you'll notice, though, is that there's no... the tones are always playing. There's no on or off to them. So that makes them feel less like notes and more just like a continuous... sort of a continuous evolving tone. So we can change that pretty easily. So we'll go ahead and start with just one voice here. We will need an envelope, and then basically an automated fader, which is what a VCA is. So we can take the output of the ADSR, the envelope. That will make the fader go up and down. We can put the input that we want to be faded. In here, and then back out the mixer. And then finally we just need to retrigger the input. Retrigger the input. And then we just need to do the same thing for the other voices. Alright, I think those are connected properly, so we can start wiring those up. And then we have a little bit of some collision because there's not a good spatial delineation between the different voices, so we can switch that up pretty easily. One way is to use octave. Another one is to use another rescale. We can just offset, essentially. So if we want this to be the high one, we can move it up an octave by moving it up a volt. And this one will move down an octave by moving it down a volt. And then just to finish things up, we can add some delay or something to just add a little bit more atmosphere to it. We can make sure that it's synced. We may need to do some clock dividing here. So one clock that I really like is the ZZC clock because it outputs a phase as well, which is a whole thing to get into later. But one thing that we get from using it is a really handy way of doing some clock dividing. So we have a clock being output. Let me just make sure we know what we're looking at here. So this clock is going to be running 4 times faster than this clock. So this clock needs to be running quickly. This clock needs to be running quickly. Thinking. I'm a little confused why it's suddenly going so much slower. pretty good. What this allows me to do now, finally, is to sync the delay to a slower clock because we were running into range issues. There we go. That's pretty much it.